There are moments in a man's life that never make the history books. Moments without speeches, without witnesses, without applause. Moments that happen quietly, in places no one photographs, yet follow a man longer than any title ever could. For Ronald Reagan, one of those moments happened long before the world knew his name. It happened on a narrow street behind a bar in Des Moines, Iowa, in the early 1930s. A place that smelled of stale beer, wet pavement, and regret. A place people passed through quickly, eyes down, hearts closed. Reagan had not meant to be there. He was in town for a short radio assignment, filling in for another announcer who had fallen ill. It wasn't glamorous work. It barely paid. But during the Depression, any honest job felt like a blessing. That night, after finishing his shift, he had walked instead of taking the streetcar. He needed air. He needed silence. He needed to hear his own thoughts after hours of pretending confidence into a microphone. The city felt tired. Storefronts were dark. Neon signs flickered weakly. Men leaned against brick walls with nowhere else to go. Every face carried the same unspoken question. How much longer can I hold on? Reagan pulled his coat tighter and turned down a side street. Hoping it would shorten his walk back to the boarding house, that was when he heard the voice. Low, unsteady, almost swallowed by the night. You got a minute, son? Reagan stopped. He could have kept walking. Most people did. But something in the voice wasn't asking for money. It was asking to be seen. Reagan turned. A man sat on the curb beneath a flickering street lamp. His coat was too thin for the cold, his hat crushed in his hands. His face was hollow in the way only prolonged disappointment can carve into a person. The man looked to be in his late 40s, maybe older. Hard to tell. Hard years age a man faster than time ever could. You all right? Reagan asked. The man let out a dry laugh. Depends on how you define all right. Reagan hesitated, then stepped closer. You need help? The man studied him carefully, as if weighing whether Reagan was real or just another passerby who would disappear the moment things got uncomfortable. Name's Walter, said finally. And no, I don't need money. Not tonight. Reagan relaxed slightly. I'm Ronnie. Walter nodded, then stared at the ground. You ever feel like you missed your chance by about 10 years? Reagan blinked. I think a lot of people feel that way lately. Walter smiled faintly. That makes me feel worse, not better. Reagan didn't laugh. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He waited. Walter continued. I used to work the rail yards. Good job. Honest job. Lost it when they cut half the men loose. Then I lost the house. Then I lost my wife. Not all at once. Just little by little, like watching a light dim. Reagan felt something tighten in his chest. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Walter shrugged. People say that. Doesn't change much. Reagan glanced down the street. It was late. He was tired. And yet something kept him rooted in place. What are you doing out here? Reagan asked. Walter looked up at him, eyes sharp suddenly. Trying to decide if tomorrow's worth the trouble? The words hit Reagan harder than he expected. That's a heavy thing to decide alone, he said. Walter studied him again. You're not from around here, Thought so. Locals don't stop to talk. Reagan sat down on the curb beside him. It wasn't a decision. It just felt right. They sat in silence for a moment. Listening to a distant train horn echo through the city, Walter spoke again. You ever think about disappearing? Just leaving everything behind? Reagan hesitated. Yes, he admitted. More than I like to admit. Walter nodded slowly. Then you understand. Reagan looked at him. I understand feeling lost. I don't understand giving up. Walter smiled sadly. That's because you still think the world has room for you. Reagan frowned. Doesn't it? Walter didn't answer. They talked longer than Reagan realized. Walter told him about his job. His wife Mary, the small house with a porch he used to fix every spring. Reagan listened. Not like a man waiting to respond, but like someone genuinely absorbing another person's life. In return, Reagan spoke about radio. About how strange it felt to speak to thousands of people and still feel invisible. About the fear that his voice might never matter the way he hoped it would. Walter laughed softly. Funny thing, son. You've got a voice people would listen to. I can tell. Reagan shook his head. You're wrong. I just lost my job. Walter waved a hand dismissively. Jobs come and go. A voice like that. That sticks. Reagan smiled politely, but the compliment landed deeper than he expected. As the night wore on, the cold crept into Reagan's bones. I should head back, he said finally. Where are you staying? Walter hesitated. Sheltered 2 blocks over, he said. If there's room. Reagan stood. On. I'll walk you. Walter looked up sharply. You don't have to do that. I know, Reagan said. But I want to. They walked slowly, side by side. The shelter's lights glowed faintly at the end of the street. When they reached the corner, Walter stopped. Listen, he said, voice quieter now. I don't want to go in there tonight. Reagan turned. Why not? Walter swallowed. Some nights, you just want to feel like you're not finished yet. Reagan thought for a moment. I'm staying at a boarding house, he said. It's not fancy, but there's a diner downstairs. They might still be open. We could get coffee. Walter studied his face, searching for pity. He found none. All right, he said. Just coffee. They walked. At the diner, they sat in a cracked vinyl booth, steam rising from chipped mugs. The waitress barely looked at them. Walter stared into his cup. You know what scares me most? He asked. What? That nobody would notice if I wasn't here tomorrow. Reagan leaned forward. I'd notice. Walter looked up, surprised. You don't even know me, he said. Reagan met his eyes. I know enough. The words hung between them, heavier than Reagan intended. Walter looked away, wiping at his eyes quickly. You're a good man, Ronnie. Reagan felt uncomfortable. I'm just listening. Walter nodded slowly. Most men don't. They finished their coffee in silence. When they stood to leave, Walter hesitated again. Will you do me a favor? He asked, what kind? Meet me here tomorrow morning. Just for a minute. Reagan smiled. All right. Walter extended his hand. Reagan shook it. Promise? Walter asked. I promise, Reagan said without thinking. Walter nodded, relief crossing his face. Good, I just don't want to feel invisible tomorrow. Reagan watched him walk back into the night. Shoulders hunched, but steps a little steadier. He went back to his room, feeling oddly hopeful. He slept well the next morning. Reagan woke early. He dressed quickly, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He rehearsed his radio lines absently, humming as he buttoned his shirt. When he reached the diner, Walter wasn't there yet. Reagan ordered coffee and waited. 5 minutes. It's past 10:15. The waitress refilled his cup without comment. Reagan glanced at the door repeatedly. Finally, a man at the counter leaned over and said quietly, You waiting on someone? Yes, Reagan replied. A man named Walter. The man's expression shifted. You didn't hear? He asked. Reagan's stomach tightened. Hear what? Found a man in the alley behind O'Malley's last night. Looked like he'd been there a while. Reagan felt the room tilt. No, he whispered. That's not. I was with him. The man shook his head gently. I'm sorry. Reagan stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. He walked outside into the bright morning sun. His chest tight, his breath shallow. He ran down the street, past the bar. Into the alley, there was nothing there now, just damp, pavement, just yesterday's shadows, just the echo of a promise he hadn't kept. Reagan stood alone, the sounds of the city rushing back around him. He whispered to no one. I said I'd meet you. The guilt hit him, not like a wave, but like a slow, sinking weight. He had listened. He had cared. He had promised, but he had not saved him, and that truth would follow. Ronald Reagan for the rest of his life. Ronald Reagan did not speak about Walter to anyone, not to colleagues, not to friends, not even to himself, not out loud. Some losses don't ask to be shared. They settle quietly, like dust in the lungs. and every breath afterward reminds you they are there. For days after that morning, Reagan walked through Des Moines as if the city had changed shape. The same streets, the same buildings, the same faces, but everything felt slightly misaligned, as though the world had shifted a few inches to the left and never corrected itself. Every alley looked heavier. Every flickering street lamp felt accusatory. Every stranger carried the possibility of being Walter, someone needing just one more reason to stay. Reagan returned to his radio duties, reading scripts and sports scores with the same steady voice listeners trusted, but something inside him had gone quiet. Not broken quieter, as if a door had closed softly, sealing a room he would not enter again easily at night. He replayed the conversation. You ever feel like tomorrow's worth the trouble? He wondered how many men asked themselves that question in silence, and how often the answer arrived too late. He told himself he had done what he could. He listened, stayed. He offered coffee. He promised to meet, but promises, he learned, are not measured by intention. They are measured by time, and time is merciless. Years. Past Reagan left Iowa, radio led to bigger stations. Bigger stations led to Hollywood. Hollywood led to fame. The world began recognizing his smile before recognizing his name. But not as a memory that startled him awake, but as a presence woven into his conscience. Whenever Reagan walked past a man sitting alone on a bench, he slowed his step. Whenever he heard a voice crack with weariness, he listened longer. Whenever someone said, "It's nothing," he wondered what it was really costing them to say that. Walter became the quiet measure by which Reagan judged himself. Not success, not applause, not power, but attention, because Walter hadn't needed saving in the dramatic sense. He had needed one more morning that felt noticed in Hollywood, surrounded by lights and scripts and people eager to tell him who he should be. Reagan found himself retreating inward more often than anyone realized. Fame was loud. Walter's memory was quiet. Sometimes, after long days on set, Reagan would sit alone in his dressing room long after everyone else had gone. He would remove his jacket, loosen his tie, and stare at his reflection, not the actor, but the man underneath. And he would ask himself a single, recurring question: who am I doing this for? He didn't always like the answer, but the question mattered, and that, too, came from Walter. When Reagan entered politics, the weight grew heavier. Leadership, he discovered, is not about speeches. It is about consequences. Every decision carried unseen ripples. Every vote touched lives he would never meet. Every delay had a cost measured in human terms, not statistics. During his time as governor, Reagan once received a report about funding cuts affecting mental health shelters. The numbers were small. The political cost of action was high. Advisors urged him to move on. Reagan read the report twice. Then a third time, he didn't say much. Not at first. But later that evening, after everyone had left, he asked a single question that surprised his staff. How many Walters does this affect? No one knew what he meant. He approved the funding, not because it was popular, not because it was politically advantageous, but because he had learned what happens when someone is told, silently, that they can wait until tomorrow. Walter's influence never made headlines, but it shaped the man who made them. When Reagan spoke about dignity, he meant the kind that survives poverty. When he spoke about hope, he meant the fragile kind that requires reinforcement. When he spoke about responsibility, he meant personal responsibility, the responsibility to see people before systems he never used. Walter's name. But Walter lived in the pauses between Reagan's words. There was one moment, years later, that Reagan never forgot. It happened during a campaign stop in a small Midwestern town. After the speeches, after the handshakes, after the cameras moved on, an elderly man approached him quietly. The man was thin. His coat was worn. His eyes were tired but alert. "Mr. Reagan," the man said, voice steady, "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" Reagan asked. "For stopping to listen," the man replied. Reagan felt a chill. Most folks don't, the man added. They hear words. You hear people. Reagan nodded slowly. That night, alone in his hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. He whispered into the silence, "I'm still trying." As president, Reagan carried Walter into rooms of immense power, into meetings where numbers dwarfed faces, into decisions where urgency threatened empathy, into moments where efficiency tempted indifference. And whenever he felt himself drifting toward abstraction, toward policies that forgot people, he returned to that alley, to the flickering light, to the crushed hat, to the man who asked for one more morning. It grounded him, it hurt, and it mattered in his later years. As time softened the edges of memory and sharpened the ache of reflection, Reagan found himself thinking about Walter not with guilt, but with sorrow tempered by understanding. He understood now that no one saves everyone. He understood that listening does not always mean rescue. He understood that compassion, while powerful, is not omnipotent. But he also understood this. Walter changed him, and changed, even when it comes too late for one person, can arrive in time for others. One afternoon, long after the presidency, Reagan sat on a bench outside his home, watching the sun lower itself behind the trees. A young man walked past, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. Reagan watched him hesitate. The young man turned back. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Do you know what time it is?" Reagan smiled gently. "I do." They talked for a few minutes. Just a few, about nothing important. About everything important, when the young man left. He walked a little straighter. Reagan remained on the bench, hands folded. Heart quiet, he did not think of Walter as a failure anymore. He thought of him as a beginning. Walter was the man Reagan couldn't save, but he was also the man who taught Reagan how to stay present, stay human, stay aware. And that lesson, born in an alley behind a bar, carried across decades, whispered into moments of power, and doubt alike, shaped a life far more profoundly than any single act of rescue ever could. Some people are not meant to be saved. Some are meant to be remembered. And some are meant to change us forever. Walter did all three. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you once met or wished you had, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. These stories live only if they are carried forward. Thank you for listening.